Hi there, I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me for another live episode of Theory of Change. It's good to see you again, and good to have you watching if you're watching it on the video archives later on YouTube or elsewhere. Let's get into the topic today. And we're also we have a little bit of a backlog on the audio side. I did want to apologize for that as I'm getting back. My family and I got COVID and had some medical issues, so I'm just digging out of everything here. So we'll get back up to speed on the audio pretty soon here. All right. It's well known by now that disinformation media played a significant role in enabling the political rise of Donald Trump. But the truth is that far-right media has been misinforming Americans for many decades. Fake news was a long thing before Facebook, in other words. Now, while these things are commonly known among political junkies on the center left, a lot of times it's hard for people to understand who aren't familiar with the topic to understand it in the broad sense in terms of facts and figures and statistics. And so that's why it can be useful often to look at an individual story and how disinformation has impacted individuals. And that's why on today's show, I am happy to be joined by Jen Senko. She is the director, producer, and writer of The Brainwashing of My Dad, which started off as a documentary and is now a book. And it chronicles how far-right radio and television hosts manipulated her father into believing all sorts of false and hateful ideas. And she's turned it into a book as well. And so I'm glad to have you here. Thanks for being here, Jen.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And I'm just going to, we're going to pause for just a second here so I can send Jen the link so she can get it out to her Twitter followers, the live stream. So there that is. I did also want to encourage everybody else, if you are watching on the live stream, make sure to retweet it, the link for it, or if you're watching on Facebook, please do retweet or share it on your Facebook page as well. And we also are doing comments. If you have any comments, unfortunately, you can't do them on Twitter because Twitter broke their video streaming API. But if you are on Facebook or YouTube, you can watch and you can submit questions. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So Jen, as I said, you did a documentary about all this. What got you into the idea of making a film about your father and political radicalization?
Well, I had made a couple documentaries before, and I'm just very curious about people, and I think other people are curious about people. And I was watching what happened to my father, and it was like watching the invasion of the body snatchers. And I was thinking, this is remarkable. I should record this. Um, it's important. It's probably going to be more important, as it did turn out to be in the future. And yeah, for a long time I wanted to do it, but I was kind of scared to at first because my dad was so volatile and angry that um, bringing up any subject that was remotely political was scary. But eventually I did do it. But yeah, I felt like what was happening to him was just um, it was like not quite a horror movie, but like a nightmare unfolding. And I saw what it could do to the country. I felt like I did see that, so I had to document it.
Yeah, well, and so had you had any prior knowledge or contact with far right media before you started working on the documentary? Like,
I
did you know who Rush Limbaugh was, or Sean Hannity, or any of these people?
didn't know who Sean Hannity was. I knew a little bit about Rush Limbaugh because I have a radio in my kitchen. And I think I was also playing around with the dials. And, I would hear like Dr. Laura Schlesinger, or I would hear like a little bit of Rush Limbaugh. And I just thought, this is like a carnival barker, like used salesman. Like he just sounded mean. And so I didn't really give it more thought. I didn't really listen that much more.
Oh, okay. Well, and I guess let's maybe step back into the process. So your father was a just sort of semi-political, not really into politics, and he lived in New York State it was New York State, right? Jersey. I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, the accent. Yeah, and anyway, so yeah, lived in New Jersey, not really into politics. Actually, if he had a political view, it was Democratic. But he got a job and had to drive a lot, and so we started listening to talk radio. Basically, is that how it was?
Well, my dad was, since he and my mother both grew up during the Depression, and then they saw a marked difference once FDR took over and was president, and all the remarkable changes. He was an FDR and then Kennedy Democrat. And it seemed like in that period, like the 50s and the 60s, everybody was excited about like, new frontier, like science. Wow, we're going to make headway. We're going to go to the moon. There was just this positive, forward-thinking, movement, and everything that he, as a Democrat, he was teaching me not to be prejudiced, and then we're Catholic, so it was like try and love everybody, except don't be Protestant. So I would say he was a non-political Kennedy FDR Democrat who used to sing in the choir, actually, on Sundays.
Yeah. Well, and so then he got a job where he had to drive a lot and started listening to radio, right?
Right. So they were living in Maryland at the time, and then my dad retired from the government, and then they moved back to New Jersey, and that's where he got a part-time job, and it was a very long commute, and so he, thinking like he always wanted to educate himself and stimulate his mind. So instead of listening to music to keep him company, he just found talk radio, assuming that it would, be educational in some way or another, or thought-provoking. And so that's when he found Bob Grant, who was called the father of conservative radio. And he was one of the early combat radio hosts, full of vim and vigor and hate, and
and very racist as well.
I was just going to say, openly racist, openly sexist, made that a badge of honor for himself.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let me just play the trailer here of the film just to introduce people a little bit more, and then we'll get into how things were.
In the 1960s, Jen Senko's dad never had a bad word to say about any race, or people, or person.
Then in the 80s, after my dad discovered talk radio during a long commute to work, he suddenly didn't like black people, poor people, gay people, feminists, Hispanics, and especially Democrats. After he discovered Fox News, they became the enemy. What happened to Dad?
The great story here for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it is this vast right-wing conspiracy, but it has not yet been fully revealed to the American public.
By the 70s and the 80s, I mean, it had been taken over by the extreme right.
Homosexual marriage is such a threat to civilization itself.
Fox News came along.
Mass murder committed by immigrants.
God controls the climate. Come on!
In asking the question, what happened to her dad, it was really like asking what happened to our media. And in asking what happened to our media, it was really like asking what happened to our country.
All right. So, yeah, and it's and you tell the story in really great detail with lots of interviews with media scholars and researchers and activists. But can you give us just the sort of little Cliff Notes version of the larger? So basically, you discovered that what had happened to your father was part of a larger phenomenon.
Right. Once I started doing the movie, people, as I say in the movie, started coming out of the woodwork, getting in contact with me, telling me, oh, this happened to their mom or their sister or their father. Most of the time, at that time, it was fathers. And then an odd thing is I started experiencing similar things that were happening to my dad with my friends. And one friend who had moved down south and came up to visit, she said the exact same thing, or she would say it around the same time in the same time period, like that my father would say it. And she was saying all this similar stuff. And I realized, wow, this is a phenomenon. And these people that I know, they're just changing like right in front of me in ways that I never thought they would change. So, that's, they were just, I found out it was a phenomenon happening all across the country. And eventually I came to think of it as an epidemic.
Yeah. Well, and it wasn't just something that was accidental. It was the deliberate product of people's, that was their ideological project.
Right. So, I think after FDR, all the economic royalists were pissed off, and all the oligarchs that FDR was making all these social programs, they were calling it communism, created Social Security, the other Radio Act programs, which, led to the Fairness Doctrine, to make sure there was not consolidation, in the media. And that really got them nervous and thinking like because before that there was 3 Republican presidents, and it was a very more capitalistic society, and so they felt like they were losing control over their oligarchy, their white supremacism in a way, if you will. And then after 1954, after Brown v. Board of Education, there was this economist called James McGill Buchanan, and he started to organize. So it started in the 50s, small, and he hooked up with Father Koch, the father of the Koch brothers, and they started organizing.
Yeah, Fred Koch, yeah.
Fred Koch, right. Yeah, and then out of that came the Birch Society, and everybody thinks like this was just accidental, and it wasn't. It was a plan. It was a plan for them to take the country back for themselves, so that basically they could earn profits and not have regulation. And actually Goldwater, President Goldwater, well, not President Goldwater, when Goldwater ran for president, he adopted some of the Birch Society's extreme views. Now, the Birch Society, they were really, really anti-communist, like so crazy anti-communist that they called the President General Eisenhower a communist. That, and people just thought they were crazy. So after he lost the run for the presidency, then there was this kind of like a declaration. Pundits were saying the right is dead. And then that's when they started really planning even more so how to get control and how to get people to vote for this libertarian Republican idea.
Or it's an anti-government idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think key to the discussion was, this idea that, well, the media we want the news media to report whatever it is that we say without question, and that if they don't do that, then they're biased against us. They're not. We don't want to hear their fact. The public shouldn't hear fact checks of our message, and this is something that became very bothersome to Richard Nixon when people would question his. He lied all the time. He was just like Donald Trump in that respect. And then he had a vice president, Spiro Agnew, who was actually had to resign because he was under criminal investigation for various things, and he really sort of crystallized the idea of attacking the media into a sense of Republican identity. And then from there, there was an interesting. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
They knew that if the media just continued to go forth in an objective way, that they would not be able to win voters. So they knew that. They made many plans with think tanks and institutionalizing all kinds of stuff, but they knew that that they had to get a hold of the media, and they couldn't allow it to be objective. So that's when they started clamoring for balance, fair and balance, so that both sides could be covered.
Yeah, well, and it's an interesting idea because, like, when you think about it, if you have a political party that says, well, we need to give more money to rich people, like any objective news media that says what they actually believe and want with their policies is going to be harmful to them. And so that's why, and so you had the development subsequently of kind of this sort of alternative focus. So Barry Goldwater ran on, the 200 proof right-wing anti-government ideas that, we're going to eliminate all these departments here. We're going to get rid of Social Security. It's socialism. We're going to get rid of Medicare. These are, and civil rights. We're going to allow private discrimination as much as people want.
That was considered way too radical.
Yeah, and so like he ran on what they actually wanted,
Right.
and he got destroyed in the 1964 election.
People freaked out. They thought, "What a weirdo! What a wacko!"
Yeah, and so instead of changing what they wanted as a policy platform and responding to the public, they said, well, we'll just get the public to think about other things instead of what we actually want. And that basically has been the right-wing political agenda from 1980 ever since.
It was like a bullfight. Like, let's distract them. Let's put other people up that they can blame for what we're going to do to them, giving more money to the rich. Let's blame poor people, Black people, gay people, feminists,
transgender people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get people to think about those in many cases, imagined controversies. Like, I mean, more recently, there was Fox News was obsessing over the shoes worn by an Eminem cartoon character. They were upset because she was stopped. I think it was the green Eminem stopped wearing stiletto heels and was wearing flat heels instead. They literally talked about that on a national news network for for days on end. And they do these things because they want their audience to think about those things
Yeah.
rather than here is the tax cuts that we want to give to billionaires. Here's
Right.
how we want to go after public education and cut the budget for it and things like that.
Right, and that creates uncertainty. The way that these things are presented, they're presented in a very emotional, angry manner. Like, and people were not used to seeing that on the news, like at least from the days of Walter Cronkite. So it made these newscasters seem like they were right. They were being righteous. They must have a point. And so something like the shoes is symbolic of what they're painting is wrong with society. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that creates brainwashing, is creating uncertainty and doubt. Once you create that mindset, it's more easily to feed them like stories that that answer to those scary stories that they're feeding them.
Yeah, well, and also it helps evade accountability, because if
Yeah,
if your base is really only interested in voting for you to promote Christian identity, or to keep Black people in their place, or whatever the motivation is, then simply winning the election and having power, that's enough. It doesn't matter what your policies are, from the brainwashed person standpoint, because all that matters is that their person is in office, and that's it. And
yeah, and that they're now right. They're now on the side of righteousness and justice, and
the nation, yeah, or the state, or whatever, yeah.
giving it to those libtards that ruin everything.
Yeah. Well, okay. So now, with regard, so I mean, now your father, so he started listening to Bob Grant, then he got into Rush Limbaugh, and then he got into Sean Hannity and Fox News once that started in the mid 1990s.
And emails.
Oh yeah. Well, let's talk about those, because I think that's an aspect that people don't know about. What are these emails and junk mail letters you're talking about?
So my dad was an electronic engineer. So he had actually worked on electronic mail in the 80s. And so he was one of the early older people to use a computer. And, me and my friends were already using it because that was their job. So he got on, once he listened to Rush Limbaugh told him about all these other things, like the Judicial Watch, the Heritage Foundation. He would talk about the NRA. So my dad got on all these lists, like hundreds of lists of right-wing propaganda. And he began sending them out to the family. And nobody wanted to, my mother would say, this isn't true, that's not true. But he was caught up in this angry world and would send them to everybody. But what I found curious and disturbing is that I would see these emails popping up at work too, and people would send them around the office. And that's another thing that made me like queasy. Like, what's going on here? All of the emails had one thing in common, and that was to demonize Democrats, whether, and liberals, whether it was like liberals hate Christmas, um, they want to take "In God We Trust" off the penny because they're godless. And anyway, yeah. So emails were a really, really big part of it. It was like a full-fledged plan. You had the radio, you had the TV, and then you had the emails, and then on top of that, you would get the snail mail.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
now a lot of these emails that are sent out to people trapped in the right-wing media vortex, they also are selling them scam products. So things like telling them, if you eat, 20 sticks of cinnamon a day, you can be immune to cancer or things like that. Did your father ever get into any of those fake cure medical stuff?
It wasn't there yet. It was mostly laying the groundwork for hating everything that Democrats and liberals stood for.
Hmm.
There would be an email, let's say, about a professor, right? Because professors, they think, are poison the mind, make people liberal, who in a classroom said, I challenge anybody that can prove that there's a God. And the story, the email goes, so a Marine got up and punched him down and said, there's your proof. So that was the kind of email that was saying professors are bad, they're democratic, they're godless, they're teaching our kids to be this way, and then glorifying like the military and Marines, and violence. So like that
Hmm.
would be one example.
Yeah.
But the
Well,
one that
and
killed me the most was when my dad sent me the email that said liberals hate Christmas, because I lived in New York and we just blew Christmas up, like we loved Christmas. So
mhm.
I just knew something really bad was going on.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about it is like the the philosophical term of what they're doing with this is that they're trying to create an alternative epistemology, not just alternative facts, but an idea that knowledge itself um, is equivalent to your feelings, basically. So like if you feel that the Bible is 100% literally true, then it is. And if you feel that such and such democratic politician is a pedophile rapist, then it must be true, because your gut feeling is all that matters. And anybody who tries to deal in the realm of facts and figures or science,
That's
these
right.
are people you should be suspicious of.
That's right. There was also in that email an anti-intellectual meme in there as well. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and it's important. And it's important because this idea got started as a way of pushing back against economists. Actually, that was how it originally started, because these right wing laissez-faire economic policies, they don't work in terms of that. Not only do they allow the creation of monopolies that actually destroy a free market, so there isn't actually private competition, but they also do make it so that there is vast inequality and actually harm the people who are voting for these policies. So they don't work and they're harmful, but um, they still want them because they want to keep their money, and they want to keep their religious hierarchy and keep things the way they were used to.
Yeah, it comes down to greed and power.
Yeah. Well, so so after the film came out, you also have turned it into a book. Let me put the cover up on the screen here. Tell us a little bit about is there anything, what's new? Donald Trump is in this book.
Oh, that's
Uh,
the old cover.
that's the old cover. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Old
Uh,
cover.
Well, tell us about what's different with the book here compared to in the movie? Is it more of an update, or what did you do differently here?
Well, yeah, it is an update and it had more research, but I also felt like, to me, I was just trying to ring a bell and tell everybody, like, save the country. Look, this is what's going on. You're being bamboozled. And because I felt like the movie wasn't getting as much attention as I felt it should get, I noticed that authors were always being interviewed, or that there was some a little bit more, what is the word, cliche with authors. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book too. And then I took the opportunity to delve more into my dad's past, to look at how Hitler came into being, like kind of like the roots of propaganda. And then, I also did more research, and I read Ann Nelson's book, Shadow Network, about the CNP. And then,
That's Council for National Policy, for those who don't know.
correct, yeah. And Democracy in Chains, and, found out that the roots went further back than even I had thought. And that's kind of where they were. And then I just, had been doing research on, like, well, what can we do about it? And then also stories, personal stories, like, people. We have a website with all these personal stories, most of them heartbreaking, like what happened to my dad, or my relative, my loved one. There's some of them positive, because they were able to help make their loved one have more of an open mind and lose anger and get back to being themselves.
Yeah. Well, and actually, that was something that I did really like about your film, is that in your own case, like that was what happened. So I'm going to just play a little bit from the end, where you talk about how your father was able to escape from this.
Yeah.
Mom would shut down his computer at night, and she started subscribing him to Truth Out and Alternet and reader-supported news.
Oh, and he would just read whatever ended up in his
He
inbox.
just read everything. And he's an avid reader. He sits at that computer and he reads whatever's in front of him.
Well, that's very interesting, and see, his thinking changed.
His politics have totally changed. He voted for Obama.
What? He voted for Obama?
In these past couple years, there's finally been peace in our house. My dad is more content than I've ever seen him. He's not angry, he's not argumentative, and he's really fun the way he used to be. And we get along really well, and I dote on him. In fact, I get along with him better than I ever have. And it's sort of a bittersweet pill, because I know these are his last years, but I'm happy that he's happy. He is my pal, and I'm his.
Yeah, it's a lovely ending, and I'm glad that you guys were able to help him escape that before he passed away.
I'm glad too, because his whole demeanor changed. He was happier than he'd ever been, and that was nice to see. That in his last couple of years, he wasn't raging and full of anger and hatred.
Yeah. Well, and just to sort of recapitulate a little bit about what you said, that your mom had gotten him to subscribe to different. Oh, I don't know what that noise there was.
Sorry, that's something on my computer. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, well, so yeah, you said that your mom helped him get a better information diet, basically, and got him subscribed, in addition to right-wing stuff, got him looking at some progressive news and things like that. And it was Now, what was his reaction at first? So he just literally read it, didn't care what it was, or did he get angry about it at first?
See, it was his whole change happened over a long period of time, probably over a year. So it was gradual. And in the meantime, my mother learned how to source. So she would research the emails that he sent her, and she would write back, "No, that didn't happen. This happened." So he was hearing some of these ideas. It wasn't that he was just in his pod anymore. He was hearing some of these ideas, and then when they moved, the radio broke, ended up in the garage, and he lost Rush Limbaugh. And immediately, they were having lunch together again, and his mood was lifted, his mood was better. And then it wasn't until he went into the hospital for a week for a kidney stone that they had old computers, so she felt like that the emails were just backing up on his computer, and like something would happen to his computer, and she asked me to get rid of them. I said, "Mom, they just keep coming because they're subscribed." So she unsubscribed, and then she got the idea, well, I'll subscribe them to some of the stuff that I read, and so I think he really did like being in the hospital. I think he was so happy to be home and just content, like sitting at his computer. Think I don't think he realized it. I don't think he recognized it so much. If he did, though, he was always curious. If he did, he just probably would say, we're going to see what the enemy is up to, or I'm going to read this anyway. So he had a great curiosity.
Yeah. Well, and that I think is, a great tool for helping people break out of this alternative media disinformation network. Is just to spark curiosity. I mean, like that's kind of the thing about QAnon, for instance, is that it actually feeds people's curiosity and lets them have this idea that they're doing research, that that they're smart too. And that's is what hooks a lot of people, is that they really think they're learning things and educating themselves. And
Right.
I mean, like in my own,
and that they belong to a tribe.
yeah,
And
exactly.
they're in the know, just like the tribe is, and so the tribe looks at them like, "Hey, you're with us. You're really smart."
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess in my own case, so I was born and raised as a Mormon fundamentalist. So I was, believe that all other religions were false. I believe that, and a lot of people don't know that Mormons actually kind of got started on this whole Christian nationalism thing. It's literally in the Book of Mormon that America was created by God as a choice land above all other lands, and that only countries that served God could be allowed to occupy the land here. Like that's in the Book of Mormon in the 1830s, and so like that was that type of messaging, that I was hearing from these far right pundits. Like it matched exactly what my own religious messaging had, that I've been grown up with. And my parents didn't really have any contact with right wing media, but it was when we started driving a lot on cross country trips, doing a lot of driving, that there was nothing else to do but turn on the radio. And in many cases, the AM signal was the strongest because FM just doesn't travel very far. And so we just started listening to Rush Limbaugh and getting more and more right wing. But I always did try to keep an interest in being like having a true knowledge and not cutting myself off from other sources. So I started making sure that I was like, well, I'm gonna once I became a right-wing activist, I started saying, well, I'm going to take it upon myself to start rebutting the left, because I don't see anybody in conservative media. They don't do it. They don't talk about what the left is talking about. So I'm going to start doing it. And then so I started doing that, reading more progressive sites. And little did I know, eventually I started thinking, okay, well, I'm going to rebut this here. So then I started looking at it. And then I saw, oh no, they're right about this thing. Okay, well, let's put that aside. I just won't talk about it anymore. And then it just kept happening over and over. And then I got fully exposed to the Christian right and what they actually want, and how they hate everyone else who's not, a far right Christian, and how they literally want to have more legal rights for themselves, and say that, in private to themselves. Like they say that, there's this guy named Tony Perkins, who's the head of this hate group called the Family Research Council. He said repeatedly that if you're a progressive Christian who believes that your church should have, do same-sex marriages, that you are not entitled to religious freedom, because your doctrines violate traditional Christianity. And so you don't get religious freedom. No religious freedom for you. And like that's once I started seeing that, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't be a part of what these people are doing anymore.
Yeah.
And that was my own exit.
As a Catholic, growing up, we were taught that there was no other religions that were accurate, and I believed, I don't know if they taught it, they probably did, but I believed going into another church was a sin. And that's kind of what that's kind of what the whole right-wing media ecosphere reminded me of, saying you can't, no other media is right, only we're right. You listen to us, and then creating that bubble, and creating doubt about anything else, and like we're the ones that are right, only listen to us. That's also very cult-like behavior, so being a Catholic, I had that similar experience, and you kind of carried that into like your knowledge, just wait, they're doing the same thing, even though they're not religious, they're doing the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, like that is what kind of happened, is that so my, I basically was effectively in a cult run by my father. And once I escaped that, and then when I started looking at politics a little bit more deeply, I started realizing, wow, all these things that happened to me earlier in a religious context are actually being done to people on a broad scale, in a political sense, by the reactionary movement. And so, I decided I had to start talking about this stuff a lot more, because, I mean, as you said, earlier, the mainstream media, they don't understand this stuff, and they kind of don't want to talk about it. I think that's
serve them anyway, because they're corporate run.
It doesn't what?
It doesn't serve them to talk about it anyway, because they're corporate run. I mean, they're run also by really, really uber rich people who don't want to pay more taxes and would prefer less regulation. So there's only so far that they'll go. They also don't want to offend their advertisers.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing also is that, for those who might be willing to say that, there's this really, having worked in, mainstream newsrooms, I encountered a lot this idea, well, we already ran an article about that, 2.5 years ago. So why do we need to have one today? And it's like, well, A, no one read your article 2.5 years ago. And B, even if they had, it's okay to talk about a subject more than once.
And C, it's about repetition, as we learn from them, because that was a Goebbels mainstay, and that was the Republicans' mainstay. And if you watched any of the hearings the other day, they just all kept repeating repetition. Takes a while for people to learn something. You have to hear it. Like what I heard was, or absorb it like 7 different ways. You got to read it, you got to hear it, visualize it, whatever. But one article isn't going to cut it. And that also speaks to the how important they think it is. You know what I mean? It speaks to the well, it can't really be that important because there was just one article written about it.
Yeah. Well, now, so the hearings you're referring to, just for those who might be watching this later or listening later, you're referring to which hearings?
The Supreme Court Justice Jackson Kachani.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Katanji. Yeah. Yeah, and so the Republican senators kept repeating these same attacks, and it doesn't matter to them whether they're true or not. Like, that's something that a lot of mainstream journalists don't get, is that they will go and invite these various right-wing people on to have a debate, quote unquote, but the reality is they're not trying to debate. All they're there is to just repeat their talking points. They're not. This isn't a reasoned dialogue that they're trying to have. It is purely propagandistic, and they're using these outlets as purely as a platform and nothing more than that. They are not there to have a discussion.
And that's what these libertarian Republicans do in general. So they'll use any opportunity to do that. Now it's even, in hearings.
Yeah, well, and and that exists also in their media side. So if you are listening to if you're watching Fox News or Newsmax, or you're listening to right-wing podcasts like Joe Rogan or any of these other people, like, they don't ever have debates with people who disagree with them. Like, they simply do not. If you are a Republican who doesn't like Donald Trump, you're banned from Fox News. If you are, a Democrat who says that, if you're just somebody who challenges Republicans in a tough way, Joe Rogan will never invite you on his show, despite he constantly proclaiming, "Oh, I just want to have conversations. I just want to talk to everyone about everything." And the answer is no, actually you don't, because you explicitly avoid topics that are against your right-wing ideology or undermine your ideas.
Right. And in right-wing radio, in the combat hate radio that we were speaking about earlier, the way it was responded to, if somebody with another point of view called in, is they were berated, they were yelled at, they were made fun of, they were hung up on,
shouted over.
Yeah, so there wasn't any debate then. And then some people that are listening to that kind of like that. It's almost like a sport, like it turns into a sport rather than a debate, and so they like it for that reason rather than liking it for the intellectual reason that we're exchanging ideas here. They're liking it that, well, this person is telling this other person who he disagrees with off, and gee, I wish I could do that, yeah, so it started back then with the talk radio and them not allowing any debate.
Oh yeah, definitely. And actually, Rush Limbaugh used to have a feature on his show in the 90s where he would say, "I'm going to do a caller abortion. I'm going to abort this liberal person who hurt my feelings." And then he would try to simulate whatever he imagined an abortion sounds like after cutting off this person. Because, and the reality is that they cannot debate their ideas. Their ideas are not based on reason. They're not based on research. They're not. And this is why they have to attack actual legitimate forms of knowledge. But it's so for people who do know this stuff, it is, but it can be hard, though, I feel like, and, to get this information out. I'm sure, in the course of your advocacy, you've kind of encountered that, as you said, that, a lot of the corporate media they don't want to talk about this stuff. They don't want to understand it. And they have this idea that you can defeat fascism with milquetoast centrism.
You can't.
You can't. Well, why not? Why would you say?
well, first of all, like Frank Luntz said, I forget exactly how he said, 80% of our life is emotion. Another 20% is like rationality. And so these people, that are all fired up and full of anger because they're listening to a radio host that's angry, or watching Fox TV, and they're all angry, and they got you angry. What it is their amygdala has taken over, and their prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that does the rational thinking, is not turned on. So you're not going to get them with anything milquetoast. I mean, I think that because when it's milquetoast, it's also creating uncertainty. It's also kind of, milky. It's mushy. It's like there leaves room for doubt. They're too afraid to be objective, to be truly objective. So the message isn't clear enough. The message has to be much more clear, and that milquetoast approach doesn't work.
Yeah, well, and it's also that, for people who have an emotional, as you were saying, an emotional attachment to beliefs, just simply saying, well, here are some other facts, and you need to decide for yourself. They didn't reason themselves into that opinion, so why would they look at those facts at all? They wouldn't. And so, some people have an innate curiosity that can be appealed to, but doing it in a way that just is simply, here's some stuff you should that you hate. You should look at it. Like, it's not going to work. It simply won't.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what's scary about it, because I mean, look at the point where we got to with January 6th. And this just built up over the years. I feared it would get to this point where now violence actually seems okay and anything goes. Again, I refer back to the hearings where these men, Hawley and Lindsey Graham and the other guys, were like barking at Jackson and seething underneath, and like, that's okay. That's okay now, and that's because of pushing the envelope over the years, with right-wing media pushing the envelope. Let's get a little more aggressive. Let's get a little more insulting. Let's push stochastic terrorism. I mean,
You're going to have to define what that means.
So stochastic terrorism is speaking in a way, not directly inciting people to violence, but it is speaking in such a way that that incidentally it incites people to violence. Let me give an example, like Alex Jones, for instance, in talking about the massacre. What was it called again? All the kids got shot.
Oh, you mean at the school? Yeah, that was the. Oh, actually, hold on, let me pull it up.
I don't know why it just slipped my mind.
Oh, Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut. Yeah.
Right. Of course. Telling people that they were actors, telling people where they lived, and getting people, and they just really, this is just a plot by the government, so they can take away your guns. Stuff like that can create violence. That's what stochastic terrorism is. I might not be explaining it that well, but and then that also happened on Fox News, like with Fauci, saying something like, "Oh, get him in the crosshairs," and you're not saying commit violence, but the things you're saying provoke people into committing violence because they
Yeah.
think there's no other alternative. They're so
Yeah. Well, and Donald Trump on January 6th kind of did the same thing. So he would say, well, we're going to peacefully demonstrate. But then earlier in the speech, he said, if you don't fight hard, you're not going to have a country anymore. If you
and
don't
he
fight like hell.
yeah
Yeah. And he said, and I'll be with you. And then, of course, did not
yeah
have any intention of
he
going
went
there
under
with them.
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but basically the idea is, yeah, to create a sense in the audience where
Mhm.
there is no hope unless you engage in violence. Violence is the only possible recourse
And
to saving your life.
right, these people, these Democrats, these liberals slash pedophiles, QAnon, are so bad and are so evil that they are destroying everything that you love. And yeah, it makes it seem hopeless. Like, well, and then on top of that, saying that there was voter fraud, which there's hardly, there's not much voter fraud to speak of. But thinking, if they think that there's voter fraud, then they're even more desperate, thinking, well, we don't have a chance.
Yeah,
So
we can't vote our way out of this. We can't win the election. So
right.
what course is there other than violence?
Yeah, and consequently, they think that they're the patriots, and it's just such a screwed up cycle.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and but the good thing is that it is possible, at least for some people, to see their way out. Do you want to maybe talk about some of the experiences of some other people that you have come into contact whose loved ones have escaped this?
Well, one thing that I'd like to tell you about is a recent. I just very recently, someone got in touch with me from the UK who had a positive experience. She had been very, very close to her dad, and he was in his 70s and he was sort of homebound. So he was listening to a lot of TV and watching a lot of YouTube stuff. And one day she heard him cursing and yelling something about immigrants. And she asked him, what was wrong? He said, "Oh, what I'm listening to is really making me mad." And it was something with Steve Bannon. And she said, "Well, so why don't you like Brexit?" And he said, "Because terrorists are going to come into our town." And they lived in a really sleepy little town. So that wasn't, even in that town, it wasn't likely to happen. So she made him breakfast. They always had a really good relationship. And she said, "I don't think you're receiving all the correct information." And she showed him The Great Hack and then my film. And then he kind of like, had a come to Jesus moment. Like he sort of realized like that he was being bamboozled. He was like my father, like a really friendly guy, would talk to anybody, and then suddenly he was like hating any immigrant just because they're an immigrant and they're probably likely to be a terrorist. So that was a positive um, story that I got. I'm really happy about that. We're going to post it on the website. But there are other horror stories too. I guess the one that sticks out the most is uh, Maria from Florida. Um, this was when Obama became president. I think it was the second time. Yeah. And she went to her aunt and uncle's house for Thanksgiving. And she brought something up about the economy and Obama, but it's just like, maybe he'll do something about the economy. And her uncle got really mad and told her, "You get out of my house." And she said, "No, I'm not getting out of your house. That's just silly." And he went upstairs, got a gun, came downstairs, and shot into the floor twice. And then she did get out of his house because basically she was scared to death. So that was one of the stories that I got. I mean, we so many stories like on the website, heartbreaking stories. You know, a woman whose husband changed because whatever, he got into an accident in his home, and he just would listen to right-wing radio all day, and then Fox, and before you knew it, you know, his entire personality changed, and he was angry and hateful, even towards her daughter, she and her daughter. And they they finally separated, and she felt it was really sad. It was really sad. So yeah, I don't know how many stories you want me to tell, but there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, I do think though that all these stories that you've received and collected and told yourself, they really show that there needs to be a drastic reorientation of the way that people who are progressive utilize media. So whether it's the donors or whether it's, you know, like big donors or small donors. So like there's a lot of people are willing to go out and donate to a candidate X, but they need to realize that the candidate, even if they were to win, they have to have some sort of support mechanism for their ideas to ever become law. Because, you know, as it is, like, let's say Bernie Sanders had become the president in 2016. You know, he would have been attacked. His ideas would have been attacked nonstop. You know, Medicare for all and things like that. Even the mainstream media was attacking these ideas. And so,
Right.
if you want the public to support these programs, you need to have more media outlets. That's just the bottom line.
Right. So yeah, and they really got restricted in 1996 with the Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich's Telecommunication Act, which just basically, you know, became a free for all for all media. Like it deregulated, and now you have maybe six, you know, billionaires that own most of the media outlets everywhere. But and then journalism, local journalism, has been greatly affected. You know, we know like hedge funds have been buying them up. So there are people that have some ideas to bring back local journalism. You know, like tax credits, voucher systems. Um, Robert McChesney he has some good ideas. I think his is tax credits. Um, but yeah, what would be really good is if we had some progressive billionaire, you know, working with somebody like uh, George Lakoff,
Hmm.
creating.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be progressive, but it has to be objective and where they stick to the truth, and you know,
Hmm.
figure out ways, maybe even with a conscious effort, to figure out ways to combat what has been in place for the last 40 years, which is poison so many Americans. I mean, literally millions of Americans have been brainwashed, and it's just astounding.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things that the audience can do from their standpoint, where they're at? Would you suggest?
Well, I am very happy to say that now there are other people who have hopped on board and realized like media is really, right-wing media is really a problem. And so there are these grassroots groups that are developing, like DDAD, disinformation, Democrats against I'm really bad at remembering acronyms, so I'm not even going to go there. Their website is stopdisinformation.org. They're dedicated to fighting disinformation, and one of the projects right now is Fox, and eliminating Fox from your cable TV. And there's various ways to do that. So they have a website where they tell you how to do that. Then they also have like sessions you can attend to figure out how to ask people in a public place how to turn off Fox, without having it be confrontational, and having a zero tolerance policy. My big thing right now, which I'm trying to get more and more attention to, is getting Fox out of the military, because it's right now it airs in the military, and if they're so concerned, like Secretary Austin, one of the goals is to root out radicalization in the military. Then why not? I mean, it makes sense to me to start with a source. Certainly, Fox is one of the sources, if not the main source. And right now it's anti-American. It's not patriotic. It's pro-Putin. So I'm trying to raise awareness for people to write Austin, write their representatives, and get Fox out of the military. So we've got several grassroots going on. There's also Truth Tuesdays. They demonstrate in front of Fox every Tuesday. They operate through this group called Rise and Resist. There's other groups which I can't think of right now. But I think we all have to really make this a focus. Another thing that we should do, really, the most unpleasant thing, is talk to people who disagree with us. And there are experts in that. There's Stephen Hassan, who is a cult expert, and he wrote The Cult of Trump. But there's also a small group called Hear Yourself Think, and they're connected with DDAD. Defenders of Democracy Against Disinformation. That's what it stands for. Hear Yourself Think. They actually have an approach. They understand the science, like the amygdala is on fire, and that you have to bring people down, get their trust, kick that out of the into the prefrontal cortex, so they're thinking rationally, and then start talking to them. But also you have to realize you have to have patience. It takes a really long time. But I think we have to do it, as unpleasant as it is. And we have to also stop hating these people so much. I mean, my dad was a really kind person who would do anything for you, loved everybody. There are people who do succumb to cults. Look at Jim Jones. Were they always like that? No. So, and
and it's important. It's important to understand that these people are, they're not the leaders. They're not the ones that are coming up with these amoral, dishonest ideas. Yeah. They're just they were tricked by them, basically.
They're bamboozled.
Yeah. And it can be hard to have that to accept that that's what happened.
I know.
But it is necessary, I think, in order to have long-term progress.
Yeah, but people can pick up my book. I'm not just trying to sell my book, but because I have a lot of suggestions in the back. I think, the Telecommunications Act really, really, really screwed us up. So we have to push for more regulation, more media regulation, antitrust. I'll give you a new book cover.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, there's a lot to be done, but the core approach is to get people to be who are aware that disinformation is a problem to take the next step and start wanting to start realizing they can do something about it.
Basically, we all should raise our voices to our representatives as often as we can that there is a problem with right-wing media, and let them know that we're aware of it, we care about it, that it's dividing our country, and try and get them to focus on that a little bit too.
Yeah, well, and to creating alternatives to that as well. So like, so I mean, while I think the work that Media Matters does is great, or fairness and accuracy in reporting is great, like these are only two organizations. Like they cannot possibly counteract these thousands of entities that are out there that are funded by giant billionaires. Two things are not enough. You need a lot more than two. And progressive philanthropy needs to be reoriented. And progressive, like people who have a national platform in progressive media, they, as a pundit or whatever, like there are a bunch of podcasts out there that are making tens of thousands of dollars a month, and they're not doing anything with that money in terms of reaching the public or expanding what they're doing beyond just a few episodes a week watched by their niche audience. Like, got to do more than that. Like if you actually, there are a lot of people out there that say, oh, democracy is under threat. Well, then you need to change what you're doing.
And everybody needs to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, all right, Jen, this has been a great conversation. So if people want to check out your work, they can go to thebrainwashingofmydad.com, right?
Right.
You've got you have a mailing list on there they can sign up for. Is that right?
Join, yeah, and I don't overdo it. If I really should have done something for this interview, but I wasn't sure because I know you didn't feel well. But for things like that, like an announcement, like this is happening, or this is what we're working on right now. It's not weekly. It's not monthly. It's according to.
Occasional.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, great. And then people can also follow you on Twitter. You are at Jen, JEN _Senko. That's SENKO. So thank you.
At Brainwashed.
That's right. Yes. I don't have that one on the Chiron here, but yes, that one as well. So, all right. If you could just stick around here for a little bit, I'll say goodbye to the viewers, and then we'll just chat a bit more. All right, so that's another program, live show for everyone today. I wanted to thank you for being here and for watching, and I did want to remind everybody that Theory of Change is part of the flux.community media network. It's a new network dedicated to discussing the larger and deeper trends in politics, media, religion, and technology, and how they all intersect with each other. So please check that out at flux.community. We're getting it back up and running now that I've my family and medical issues are out of the way. So it's at flux.community. And then if you want to go to theoryofchange.show, that will take you directly to the archives of the program. And then if you like what we're doing here, we definitely can use your support. Go to patreon.com/discoverflux. So thanks for being here today. I am Matthew Sheffield, and I will see you next time.